Lamed Vav. This was after the rescue of hostages by Eretz Yisrael from Entebee. Some of you might be too young to remember this. That was an amazing, miraculous event, and the Rebbe derived from it many lessons. And in this Sikha from Yud Gimel Tamuz of Tafshin Lamed Vav in 1976, the Rebbe is going to speak about how there is the power of the quality over quantity. That when we are dealing with a problem and we're dealing with the nations of the world, we have to realize that we have quality over quantity, and that's what matters ultimately, not the quantity. And the quality over quantity is similar to the neshama over the body, and the same way, the way how they fought how they rescued the hostages in Entebee. So it was quality over quantity, and this is, I believe, fits in with our general theme of Bitochon, of having trust in Hashem, even though things may look like it's hopeless and or things look like they're at a stalemate, and we have to realize that even though we are quantitatively less, we have the power of the neshama and the quality that can overpower anything. And that's the lesson that the Rebbe takes from the rescue at Entebee that we're going to learn about now. Just an important...
Hanukkah also is quality over quantity, like...
Correct.
Where we were ma'atim.
Atim ha'ma'at. Yeah, Rabbi Ad Ma'atim. And just to make note, so you don't get confused, I know this is a Simcha and Bitochon Shiur. We're going to have a lot of usage of the word Bitochon here in this Farbrengen. But in this Farbrengen, when you use the word Bitochon, it's not in the classic Lashon Kodesh sense of Bitochon, meaning Bitochon in Hashem, but rather Bitochon, the way we're going to use it here in the expressions of the Sikha, means security. The Rebbe is going to talk a lot about security through the Israeli soldiers that rescued, and so on and so forth. Okay.
One leads to the other, right?
True, of course. The Rebbe is going to connect both of them. This is, like I said, it's the middle of a Farbrengen, so we're starting from Ois Yud Aleph, and he says, Duber La'el, earlier in this Farbrengen was spoken about, just a chapter beforehand, Sif Yud, Shemizman Lizman Noisum Liyehudi Lirois, a Jew is given to see, Shenitzachen Be'inyan Mesuyam, Be'alma Dain, that a victory and success in a particular matter in this world, nasai de hagboras ha'eches alakamus, comes about through quality ruling over quantity, in general, even in the physical. But that quality ruling and defeating the quantity is connected with another quality that rules over quantity. Shekshura im hagboras haneshama laguf. It's connected with the soul controlling and ruling over the body. Shekshura im hagboras nishmas ha'olam hakadosh baruch hu shemamalas ha'olam al helam ha'olam veltishkeit. The ruling and the control of the neshama over the body is connected with the control and the rulership of the neshama of the world. Who is the neshama of the world? Hashem is also called the neshama of the world because he fills the world like the neshama fills the body. And that control and rulership of the neshama of the body has to do with Hashem's rulership over the world, which is from the word concealment. So now, this concept, the Rebbe first introduces the idea of quantity concerning the Bnei Yisrael. Ubehegd, by first prefacing, Bnei Yisrael hayitamid bekamus hama'at mikol ha'amim. Yidden were always quantitatively the fewest of all the nations. Ve'etzel Bnei Yisrael atzman b'chaye ha'yoyim yoyim ha'eches shalahem ma'at bekamus legabe ha'kamus. Even by the Yidden themselves, the quality part of the day, quality time of the day, is few, is least in comparison to the quantity. He's going to explain exactly what he means. Hainu, this means the time that is used for eating and drinking, or or to make a living according to Shchonaruch, or to be involved in worldly matters, who yoiser bekamus me'azman shemenatzel l'tfila limrat Torah v'kiyum mitzvahs. Quantitatively, it is more that the person spends time on mundane matters than the time that he uses for davening and Torah study and fulfillment of mitzvahs. So that's a deeper concept of being the fewest of all the nations. There are things in which we act like the nations, eating, drinking, making a living, sleeping, etc. And there are things that we are uniquely Jewish by, the Torah mitzvahs that we do. So we are few, meaning the quantity of time that we devote to matters of Torah mitzvahs is less quantity-wise in comparison to the time that we use for other things. The Afal became, skip the parentheses, still in all, the entire existence of a Yid, that he doesn't lose his existence. If he is quantitatively less, the nature of something that's less in quantity is usually that it's overwhelmed by something that's bigger in quantity. What prevents that the Jew who is little in quantity, and also his Jewishness is less in quantity over his otherness of his existence? Why doesn't that become lost? Why doesn't that become nullified? Totally bekach, it's dependent on the fact it's dependent by the Yid, his quality overcomes, defeats, and runs the quantity. So when you bring quality to bear, so the quality ensures that the quantity doesn't get lost. Now, I'm going to go off on something that the Sikha doesn't say openly, but just to give an example of this from other things that the Rebbe always makes reference to. We were talking about something less in quantity should become lost in something that's greater in quantity. And we know this is a din in halacha, that if something not kosher falls into a mixture of something that's kosher, so then, depending on the amount, the quantity, the greater quantity of the kosher overwhelms and nullifies the smaller quantity of the not kosher item, and the item still remains kosher. There are exceptions, though. If the item that fell inside the mixture could be very small, but it's a chashuv thing, it's a valuable thing, it's an important thing, it's either something that we count, it's a davar shebeminyan, or it's an entire entity of its own. However, it makes it a distinct, unique entity. So we see over here how the quality of the smaller item is enough to make sure that it doesn't become subsumed by the greater quantity. So we see over here that the quality helps it hold its own and shouldn't become nullified. The Rebbe over here is going a step further. It's not just that the quality protects it from being swallowed up by the quantity, but even more so, something of smaller quantity can overwhelm, rule, control, and defeat a greater quantity of things if it's greater in quality. And I believe I saw this much also from the Rebbe. The head is not as big as the feet. And yet, even though quantitatively the head is not as big as the feet, and definitely not as big as the entire body combined outside of the head, still in all, the head qualitatively is much greater than the rest of the body by the brain and by all the higher senses like seeing, hearing, and so on that's present in the head. Therefore, the head is not just that it doesn't become subsumed and nullified by the greater quantity of the body. The head actually controls and runs the entire body. So that's the same point that the Rebbe is going to be going throughout the Sikha over here, bringing out point after point about how quality does not just ensure that the smaller quantity should not become this battle, but just the opposite. Even though it's smaller in quantity, if it has a greater quality, it will control, rule over, and defeat the greater in quantity. So it goes on, this has been so from when the Jewish people became a nation. By the giving of the Torah. That was in the wilderness. Since then, since the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people are likened to fish in the sea of Torah study that was given to them in Har Sinai, the famous example that Rabbi Kiva said that if the Jews were to stop studying Torah, it would be like taking fish out of the sea, etc. Just like a Jew cannot change the fact that he was born a Jew. He was born a Jew, that's it. Or he cannot change the fact that he was converted according to Allah. Whether he wishes to continue being a Jew or he doesn't chas shalom wish, this is the way the Jew was born. Ben Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Basara Rivka Rachel Leah is the son of Avram Yitzchak Yaakov and a daughter of Sarah Rivka Rachel and Leah. Va'af echad eine yachol l'shanezos, and no one can change this. LiYehudi nitna bechira chavshis, a Jew was given free will, free choice. Chutz midavar echad v'yichidi. There's one exception to the free will rule, one singular, unique exception. Mi shenoilad Yehudi ayizgayer kalacha kein yokum. Whoever was born a Jew or converted according to halacha, that is what will stay. That is what will remain. Hu nishar Yehudi b'olam hazo b'olam haba v'ad soif kol hadoros v'chasal. He remains a Jew in this world and in the world to come, and to the end of all generations, and that's it. Mizem, move on. From this, it's also understood. Gam also she'eina yachol l'shanis esafani hashmira shaloi. A Jew cannot change his means of protection. This is how it also fits into our topic of Simcha and Bitochon. How a Yid receives protection, how a Yid is physically secure from attacks, that cannot change, just like the fact of his being a Jew cannot change. Dag, a fish, im yis'akshu loymar sheyitziu oisei ve'aboshu v'sham yishru mo olav, even if someone will be stubborn to say that they'll take the fish out onto dry land and they'll protect it over there. Hare Ametziasi, still in all, the fact is, Shedogim Shabiyam Kivim Sha'olim Liabosha Miyad Chulu Chepachayim. Fish of the sea, as soon as they go up onto dry land, immediately it's the opposite of life for them. Hadag Tzoyek, the fish can shout, Shuratzoyni Likvoitz V'lias Biyaboshi, he wants to jump and be on the dry land. Ubalabayis Shalai Aquarium Imadogim Roitzalach Zikabayabosha. And the one that owns the aquarium with the fish wants to keep them on dry land. V'eina Roitzamayim. The owner of the aquarium doesn't want the water. Meizatam Shiyeh, for whatever reason. Either because it's better, more beautiful, or it's easier. It's a lot of bother to go ahead and deal with the water, and you got to change the water and so on. It's not going to help what the fish wants or what the aquarium owner wants. Since the nature of a fish is, as soon as he leaves the water, it becomes immediately the opposite of life. And the Rebbe now applies it concerning the Yid, as we said before, that a Jew also needs to be immersed in the water of Torah. So too, concerning this, it says in the Gemara, Shekenu waits Lich Yisrael v'nagel Torah mitzvahs v'yadus. So too, it's by a Jewish person concerning Torah mitzvahs in Yiddishkeit. Beinim uroitza loy, whether he wants to or not. Liyos a Democrat, since he's a Democrat, not Democrat with a capital D, not the party Democrat, but he believes in democracy. V'oirich bechirois. He makes elections, v'mishal, and he goes ahead and he makes polls, v'mevarer b'toinim, and he checks it out in the newspapers, v'roya, and he sees shekulam tzayakim shutzarech liches b'yabasha, yavish mein maim ala Torah. He sees, because he takes a poll, and he looks in the newspapers, and he sees everybody says that the Jew has to leave the water of Torah behind. He has to live on dry land. V'yavish mekima mitzvahs. He has to be dry from fulfillment of mitzvahs. Machriz hateva. Nature proclaims. Just like by a fish that goes out of the water, the nature proclaims. So too by a Jew. You don't need faith for this. The entire existence of a Jewish person is because the quality had overpowered the quantity. Because if we would have given up Torah, chas v'sholem, we would have become drowned and subsumed in all the nations of the world over our 3,000-year history. The only reason why the few Jews remained in existence is because of our connection. That was a qualitative connection, the connection with Torah that allowed the quality to overrule the quantity that we are very few amongst the nations. Concerning Torah, it says, it's our life and the length of our days. It's both the life of every individual Jew, and it's also the life of the entire Klal Yisrael as a whole. Not only that, it's not just ordinary life, the length of our days. Through connecting with Torah, following Torah, being immersed in Torah, then our days become long days. What does it mean, long days? It should have said that the Torah is our life and many days. Why does it say long days? Like the Alter Rebbe says concerning Mashiach's time, it says a day that's entirely long. And he says parenthetically, the whole term, what's it mean a long day? Every day has 24 hours. It's not possible to be less or more. skip the parentheses, shebetchilosei aruch, it's initially long. From its beginning, it's long. What does that mean in our situation? What does it mean that Torah gives length to our days? So the Rebbe says a very simple thing. Ubenidun didan, and in our situation where we're talking about a life that's involved in Torah versus the opposite, true, there could be a day that has 24 hours on the clock. They have no content, they have no meaning, they have no value. And then the day is not 24 hours. Then in truth, it's a day that's even less than a minute. When we ask such a person that doesn't have the Torah as his life, what did he do throughout the day? What did he accomplish? He has nothing what to show, because for him the day doesn't exist. It has to be that he comes into the days like it says by Avram Avinu. Yoimin Shleimin, coming into the days, the Zohar explains that they should be full days. Lahamid Yoim Sheyesh Bitochon, to establish a day that has meaning, that has content in it. Avol Etzlei, but a person that doesn't immerse themselves in Torah, Loi Kayim Ayoim, the day did not exist for him. Hu Amnam Achal V'Shasav Al, he ate and he drank and he spent time, took a walk. V'Asas Kol Inyanim Shebehem Mishtava Ben Adol Behem, and he did all the things that in it there is a common denominator between a human being and of an animal. He doesn't have a human day. But the opposite, the other hand, there could be a day that by nature only has 24 hours. When one acts according to Torah, and we fill it with good things, with Torah and mitzvahs, in such a way it becomes a Jewish day. Then it becomes a long day. When the person studies Torah with such a passion and such a vitality and such joy that permeates him entirely, then he accomplishes in 1 hour that what another person would need 24 hours to accomplish. So too he accomplishes in the second hour what would take another person 24 hours. So now we can understand how he has a longer day than someone else that has a day of 24 hours. It's not speaking about over here a day that doesn't exist. The day exists. It could be an ordinary day. It could be a long day. The length of our days, and what determines if the day will be a long day, that the pasuk says Oirach Yameinu. So it says this is accomplished through connecting the day with the Torah. Because Torah is higher than the measure and limitations of time. Skip the parentheses. It's able to embed also in time, in boundaries and constrictions. Over there, a Yid should also have a day that's entirely long. Like the expression of the Alter Rebbe, that initially it is long. The first day becomes a long day. So now the Rebbe is going to explain that sometimes this is not visible because we don't recognize the power that quality can have over quantity until something extraordinary happens, like he's going to explain the rescue of Entebee. Then we see the power of the quality over quantity, and this could teach us as well about the bringing of the quality into our lives. Yud Beis, second paragraph on the page. Because the fact that we are invested in day-to-day life, we see every day the same thing repeat itself. We see that planting and harvesting and cold and heat, day and night, don't cease. So things just keep on going the normal way. You can imagine that these are the rules of nature. They're just rules. Without any soul to it, without any mind and explanation for it. This means as follows. No one understands what nature is and why there is laws. Science only explains that there are such laws. So they'll explain that there's the rule and law of gravity. And when you ask why, so you say, that's the law of nature. That's the way it works, that a bigger body will attract a smaller body. So you keep on pressing the scientist and you ask him, but why does a bigger body attract a smaller body? Why, if I leave something go out of my hand, it's going to fall to the floor? He said, it's a rule of nature. So they don't understand what nature is. We don't understand what nature is. Nobody understands what nature is. And nobody understands why nature has to have rules. But it's just there. So therefore, the Yetzer Hara uses this fact that nature makes no sense, and the rules of nature makes no sense, and uses it to distract us from trying to find meaning in what occurs in the world. The Yetzer Hara found a way of like hanging his hat on it and saying, there are laws of nature. What laws? What nature? What does that mean? That's what it is. That's what it's called. Don't ask questions. It's an axiom. Therefore, once you've decided it's a rule of nature, okay, no need to think further. Instead of investigating who made the nature, how did the laws of nature come about? No, it's a law of nature. It's a rule of nature. Don't think about who runs and who owns nature. Who is the one that made the nature? And who was the one that established the rules of nature? Because of lifnei, like it's explicit in the pasuk before the zer of a kotzer v'chayim, that the laws of nature had a creator of the world. That he wanted that nature should be in such a way that it doesn't cease. So why do we just accept this without question? Why don't we constantly think about the fact, where these laws and rules come from? Who made them? Since the nature of a person is that habit becomes nature, because of being accustomed to it, because it's habitual, he doesn't think about the one who owns this palace, like Avraham Avinu wanted to know who was Balabai Shel Birazu, but rather we have our heads stuck in the rules of nature itself. He thinks about the planting and the harvesting and the heat and the cold and the heat and day and night, all the things we learned in Parshas Noach, they won't cease. The way it runs from day to day, from year to year, and from generation to generation. That's what happens. We get lost in the things that we're accustomed to, and we forget to think about who and what put the laws of nature into motion and controls and sets all the laws of nature running the whole time. So the Rebbe says, so thankfully, Hashem helps us. And Hashem sometimes will go ahead and blow our minds. So therefore, we should see something extraordinary, and that helps us start thinking in a totally different fashion. Therefore, to make it easier for us to reach the perfect recognition that there is an owner, to someone that controls this big palace, this big universe, this big world. It's of necessity that from time to time there should be dvarim mizazim, things that shake us up, that go out of the category of nature and what we're accustomed to. And this reminds the person about the true concept, what the world is about. Like the pasuk says, that the truth of Havaya is to the world. Hainu, that godliness is the truth of the world. So Hashem has to sometimes shake things up, and that's how we're going to recognize that Hashem is in control. And by prefacing the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that it's a foundational and principal belief in the Torah. When one contemplates the view of the world as Torah sets it up. Anything that a Yid sees or hears, the Baal Shem Tov teaches that it's a sure thing that the reason why a Yid is seeing or hearing this, he's hearing it by divine providence, so that the thing that he's seeing or hearing will help him fulfill the goal of his creation. I was created to serve my Maker. That Hashem created the world. Hashem created the person. He also, Hashem created the event and the unusual occurrence. Just like Hashem established in nature the rules of nature that they do not change, so too the same God established and made this type of unusual occurrence to get our attention and wake us up for a minute from our stupor and to be able to see who really runs the world. And here the Rebbe is going to bring in about the Entebee rescue. Here we are coming to the matter that's completely shaken us up, that happened lately. This shook up both the Jewish people and the nations of the world when they saw this. Let's skip over the parentheses to the next page. Nes v'hatzola shall asaris Yehudim shenitzlu mehepech hachaim l'chaim. A miracle and a salvation and a saving of tens of Jews that were saved from the opposite of life to life. Ve'viu oisam al eretz neshavos, and they were brought to a settled land, eretz toiva rechava, a good and broad land. These are all terms used by Eretz Yisrael. Eretz asher eini al Hashem elokecha ba mereish hashana v'adach, a land that the eyes of Hashem your God examines it and looks at it and watches over it from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. Though by the rules of nature, there was no possibility for this to take place naturally. How could it be that the Yidden that are trapped in Africa, surrounded not just by terrorists, Yimach Shemam Zichrom, but a hostile government, and the troops of the government were protecting the terrorists and were threatening the Yidden as well, that there would be a possibility of a handful of Jews would travel the thousands of miles to rescue them. I remember this. It was mind-blowing. When I first heard about it, I didn't believe it happened. I told the person that told it to me, you must have misheard. It couldn't be. It could never happen. This is like such a above nature type of event. And the Rebbe also spoke a lot about how this is an open miracle of Hashem, and any Jew that was rescued from that place, if he come back to that place in Entebee, has to make a certain bracha. Baruch atah Hashem she'asli nes b'makom hazeh. And it's halach in Shulchan Aruch that it's considered that's mamish a miracle. And the Rebbe was emphasizing this many times, that this is an open miracle. But now the Rebbe is going to bring this back to the idea that we were talking about. Few in quantity will be able to accomplish and overcome through being much and powerful in quality. So he says in the second paragraph, here we see also in the eyes of flesh that the quality overcame the quantity. Similar to there was a story in Tanakh in Gidon, who was led by Hashem to fight the enemies of the Yidden, and there was a whole thing that there was tens of thousands of troops, and Hashem said, get rid of, we don't need so many, and 22,000 left, and there was still 10,000 left, and Hashem wanted even fewer. Eventually it was whittled down to only 300 troops, and the Eibishter said, I want that it should be recognizable that this was not a matter of defeat of numbers, that because we had so many troops, that's why we defeated them. I wanted it to be totally recognizable this was a godly event. So just like over there, that Hashem wanted it to be very few, and the few defeated the many, so too was over here in Entebee. The way the normal strategy is when you're fighting an enemy, there's a necessity of setting things up and preparation, that there is someone that makes a big tumult, and someone that makes really throws the fear into the enemy. Skip the parentheses. In addition to making a whole big tumult, you need to seek advice with all the good friends, the Rebbe puts it in quotation marks, that in the entire world before you're going to do anything. And the Rebbe says in the brackets, even those that are not necessarily true friends, it's just we gotta seek their advice anyway. Skip the brackets. Only afterwards did they proclaim and they let everybody know that they received an agreement from all their friends, and they received neshek, they received military supplies, and they received the enough soldiers. And then that's why Oimdim Lasis Kach V'Kach, we're going to do such and such. That's the normal way of fighting a war. V'ilukan Hoyan Etzachem. Here the victory in Entebee took place. They completely negated any types of calculations pertaining to time, any types of calculations having to do with place, location. V'shalu es cheshbonis ma'yoim ra'ididim atoivim. They negated any type of calculations. What will the good friend say? Which was, the Rebbe said was and everybody knows this was the big downfall, Rahman al-Islam, during the Yom Kippur War, because they didn't want to be accused by America of being the aggressor like they were in 1967, and therefore they were willing to stand back and be attacked, Rahman al-Islam. And they negated any type of calculations of anyone that was involved in it. They knew that if you overthought it, if you thought about it too much, you wouldn't do it. And just the opposite, than making cheshbonos of a normal army attack. If they would have flown with an entire air force of planes, the whole matter would not be able to pass in a quiet manner. So then, because they would have right away realized that they're under attack, would have been the opposite result than what happened by flying only in the utmost secret, and only in the most minimal amount of planes, and specifically without any type of publicity and without any arrogance and ego. Matters that are the opposite of the calculation of the body. Only in this expressed itself the secret of the victory. By using these type of means. Hein bepula atzma, whether in the actual event and attack itself. Nitzcha loy hakamus, what was victorious was not the quantity. Kamus gedolah shel chayolim shel zayin. It wasn't that there was a greater quantity of soldiers or a greater quantity of weapons. Shari adra, but just the opposite. There were less soldiers and less weapons over those that they had to overpower. Because, like I mentioned before, it wasn't just the terrorists that they had to overpower. They also had to overpower the Ugandan military that was helping the terrorists. That quantitatively, the soldiers and weapons that was awaiting them on the ground in Entebee was so much more, incomparably so. Both those that the troops that were there on the ground. And then the Rebbe adds another thing. In addition to the troops on the ground, if we bring into calculation, if we take into consideration all of those that the Israeli Air Force had to fly over, that they had to pass over a lot of enemy territory to be able to reach Entebee. To free them, and also to bring them back to Eretz HaKodesh. So, not only was the quantity of troops and weapons on the ground greater than the troops and the weapons of the Israeli soldiers that rescued them, so much more. But also, if you now take in consideration the weapons and the troops and the Air Force, etc., of all the unfriendly countries that they had to fly over to get there and to return from there, so it's even more so quantitatively they were greater. So how did they manage? So he says in the last line of the page, the quality of those who were freeing the prisoners was greater than the quality of those from whom the prisoners had to be freed. And he goes on the top of the next page. V'yiseirim, even more so, within the ones who freed them, meaning the Israeli soldiers themselves, within those people themselves, the quality overcame the quantity. You remember the beginning of what we started learning today? The Rebbe said, not only are the Jewish people quantitatively less than all the nations, but also quantitatively, the amount of time that they're involved in the day of Torah mitzvahs was less. In other words, quantity is physical concerns. Quality is spiritual concerns. The Rebbe is saying that those that freed the hostages in Entebee, the Israeli soldiers, their quality within themselves overcame their quantity. The spiritual overcame the physical. Second paragraph. Mitzad HaKamas Shalahem, from the perspective of their quantity. Meaning, Mitzad HaCheshbonos Shalaguf, from the perspective of the calculations of the body. Loihoya Makim Klal, there was no room whatsoever. Shemalachatchila Yachnusu Satzim B'chol Adavar. They should even enter into such a thing. Who would have thought? You tell a soldier to go ahead and fly thousands of miles to Africa to go ahead and rescue them thousands of miles back. The whole thing is so illogical. The nature and the laws of nature of the body is everything wants its own survival. So the nature of a body wants to keep on existing, not to die, chas v'shalom. From the perspective of the body, in other words, quantitatively, the soldiers of Israel would not have done this. Who wants to risk and give up their lives? It goes against the laws of nature. It's only because by them their spiritual calculation overcame. Even more so. It wasn't even a calculation involving the spirit. It was a spiritual leaning that's beyond calculation. Even beyond spiritual calculation. Therefore, they invested themselves initially in the entire matter. And again, further, even after they arrived in Entebee, the victory expressed itself through them bringing the thing out of its limitations and boundaries. There was some type of grasp in natural means, some type of way how the mind could somehow say it's not entirely miraculous. But still in all, this was the vessel. The natural means that they did was a vessel for the success of the action in a miraculous way from the Eibishter. And the Rebbe says, Nes God lo yasham. Like we write on the dreidel about Chanukah. It was a great miracle was over there. V'loimar to say, Hoidu l'Hashem ki tov kilam chazde. Praise to Hashem how good He is, that his chesed is everlasting. Skip the next paragraph, skip the parentheses. Like we said, like we were saying before, they saw with their eyes of flesh. That quality will overrule and defeat the quantity. How is that so in the physical world? Because spiritually it's that way. שזה קשור עם העובדה שהנשמה שבכל אחד הכריע החשבון של גופי. It's connected with the fact that the neshama in every one overcame the calculations of the body. והאפשרות לכך שיהיה בכוחה של הנשמה להכריע הגוף. What it gives a person the capability that the neshama should be able to overcome the body. Skip to the next line after the brackets. It's through the fact that the neshama of every individual is connected with what we spoke about at the beginning of this shiur, with the neshama of the entire world. What's the neshama of the entire world? Nishmas kol chai, the neshama of all living things, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kifi she'inyan alakus ba ba'olam, like godliness manifests and comes down into the world. And through being connected, and through its essential connection with the soul of the entire world, va'ideza mekabelas kol neshama pratis as achayis va'akoyach l'natzech saguf shelo. Through that, every individual neshama receives the vitality and the energy and the power to overcome its body, ulanatseach games hagufim shel acherim, and also to defeat the bodies of others, meaning those that were attacking Yidden. Ubechlolus, and in a general manner, sha'eiches tenatseach sakamus, that the quality should be victorious and defeat the quantity. So this is a very great lesson in our sugya of Bitochon, that our connection with Hashem allows us to overcome even things that naturally seem impossible to do, which is the true idea of Bitochon. The true idea of Bitochon applies like the case of Entebee, when it doesn't seem like there's any natural means of salvation. That is the ultimate level of Bitochon. Still in all, I have Bitochon in Hashem, and the reason is because Hashem is the neshama of the world, and the eiches and the quality overcomes the quantity.